Sarah's rapid journey to the hospital resulted in painful temple pains and darkened vision. The doctor rushed to see her, but she ended up in a terrible traffic jam. Sarah was unable to remain still and wait for the traffic to calm down, so she gave the money to the taxi driver and quickly dashed onto the road. She sprinted through 3 lanes of cars. She was pondering over the worst-case scenario at that moment. She repeatedly reminded herself to anticipate what they'll say before expressing any anxiety. Nevertheless, her mind painted melancholic images every time. Her son had been suffering from a severe autoimmune disease for 3 years. His body was self-harming. The disease was eventually put to rest by doctors, but it continued to recur. The tone was more assertive this time. The therapy was no longer effective. Sarah made every effort to earn a living, withdrew most of her savings, and placed Emiliano in the most sought-after private clinic due to her urgency. Her son's treating doctor, Cetanino Esteban, invited her to meet him for a conversation. It was evident that it wasn't a favorable indication. It wasn't until Sarah entered his office that she felt drained. Holding her chest tightly, she bent down and greedily sniffed for air. "What was the reason for your quick running?" Cetanino inquired. "Get comfortable on the couch and take a deep breath. You requested my presence at the earliest. I had the impression that something terrible had occurred, as Sarah put it. It hasn't it? You wouldn't call me so urgent for no reason. The second I called, it was not my intention for you to come over here. In any case, let's get straight to the crux." The physician briefly halted and proceeded with a completely different approach. "The dialogue is uncomfortably bad. According to Cetanino, Emiliano required a bone marrow transplant. The only way to beat the disease was through this, as previous treatments had been ineffective. The boy's condition was worsening with every passing day. He was unable to fight the disease. His physical state was deteriorating and losing strength. Yet there was another obstacle. The registry did not have any suitable donor. If you're willing, we can take a sample from you right now to determine if you are suited," Cetanino went on. "It's unfortunate that even close relatives aren't always in harmony." Sarah positioned her hands over her face and let her head rest on her knees. She commenced crying with intense emotion. The doctor was unaware of what was going on. He had stated that there was a possibility. Cetanino reprimanded himself mentally for raising the possibility of incompatibility. He was unsure of how to console the distressed mother. He was unaware that the issue was not related to compatibility. The situation was significantly more dire. "It's over," Sarah said. "Emiliano's mother isn't my own. I'm curious, what exactly is it?" "What's the reason for not revealing this earlier?" the physician stated. Sarah replied that she didn't think this information would be helpful. "It is only known to a close friend of mine. That's it for now. It's likely that the boy has family ties. Look for them as soon as you can." She was informed by Cetanino. The woman expressed concern, stating that it is not possible while looking at the wall. "I've made an effort to uncover something about his past, but they informed me that the documents are gone." It seemed as though Sarah's life was a mishap. She had always been alone. During her time in school, she only had 2 friends who were still very close and dear to her. The relationships with males were also unsuccessful. Sarah had never laid eyes on her father before, and she was unaware of her mother's untimely death. Sarah was a pretty girl with admirers, but she couldn't make any serious friends. Her boldness and strong character often turned men off, even though she made a few attempts to establish something serious. Her first boyfriend of 5 years had been cheating on her and her best friend, who she had known since school. Sarah lost both her love and friend during the night. They were preparing to get married. Ultimately, Sarah's school acquaintance tied the knot with her ex-boyfriend. Their family life and future were of no interest to Sarah. The second serious relationship was just as disheartening. Sarah's boyfriend was a freeloader, and as soon as his accounts were frozen, he couldn't afford to feed himself or his girlfriend. Sarah was in love and forgave everything. He eventually requested a substantial loan and vanished. Despite making several efforts to track down the fraudster, Sarah acknowledged that she had been tricked and didn't pursue him further. Sarah had not given up on love and had chosen a serious relationship for the 3rd time. Her final attempt was made. She encountered a wealthy man who was caring, kind, and giving. The couple had intentions to get married, but Sarah's decision to marry him left a lasting impact. Her affection reverted to a dictator, forbidding his future wife from dressing up in suggestive attire. He stated that any dress beskered above the knee with a slight neckline was considered excessive. He objected to her wearing makeup and restricted her access to the office only for work. The man's ultimate blow was when he punched Sarah because she had not yet prepared dinner for his imminent return. Sarah, of course, was not able to tolerate such treatment. There was no value in a life of love or wealth. Sarah had to seek psychological help after the last relationship. Her mental state had been completely shattered by her ex-partner. Her confidence was restored after undergoing therapy, making her even more self-assured. She has resigned herself to the fact that she would never be hurt by anyone again. Sarah's earnings were satisfactory. Her career skyrocketed after she ended her previous relationship. Working her way up the corporate ladder from a junior manager to deputy director at the local bank, she put all of her energy into work. Even so, her bond with coworkers was strained. She refrained from attending parties and was not requested to join group lunches. This was a result of her demanding and strict behavior. Sarah's success in boosting profits was marred by the loss of regular social connections and frequent rejection from her colleagues who were friendly. At first glance, her life seemed to be going smoothly. An apartment in the heart of the city, a good job she relished, and an unwavering friend. However, she was missing out on a complete happy family in her life. There was no lack of social interaction for her. She had a tendency to handle everything independently. Despite her efforts, Sarah couldn't find the right man. She was still single at the age of 37. Sarah's friend Dorothea became pregnant, causing her to feel more despondent. Despite her desire to become a mother, she only took care of her cat at the moment. At that point, she contemplated adopting a child from an orphanage. Are you devoid of mental energy? The genes that the child could inherit are uncertain. Dorothea attempted to convince her. Families with various problems often form the basis for many orphanages and children. Sarah's response was that it was not true. In my view, it's not about genes, but rather your upbringing. I'm 37 years old. Think about the amount of time that passes while I'm in search of a spouse and we attempt to become parents. I'm tired of being around a bunch of cats in my old age, feeling nothing but important. I am determined to have a child, even if it's not my blood. Dorothea and her friend stopped arguing. At last, everyone had their own lives to lead, and only Sarah could decide what she believed was right. Her opinion was that there was some logical reasoning. Nevertheless, Sarah's happiness was the most crucial factor. She was, but not for an extended period. It didn't take long for them to approve Sarah's adoption. Her well-off and educated woman appearance was a pleasing one, given her good earnings and comfortable living conditions to the orphanage director. Soon, Sarah picked out a boy she wanted to adopt. The bright blue eyes and light hair of the baby melted her heart. He had just arrived at the orphanage. The sight of a mark on the baby's skin left Sarah distraught. The local caregiver's treatment of the sore spot was causing her concern. At 6 months old, Emiliano was adopted by Sarah. Her decision to allow such a young child to go through every phase of motherhood was deliberate. She was filled with happiness. The ideal life was fully realized, even without the presence of a spouse. She made up for the absence of love by spending time with her son. To adjust to her new job, Sarah took a break from work. She was immediately aided by Dorothea. She was a mother of 2 who had experience with calic and knew how to use it to ease teething pains. Dorothea was happy for Sarah and enjoyed giving her advice. Sarah was outmatched by Dorothea on this occasion. Sarah was enamored with her new role. She was strolling along the streets, holding her head high as she did. The neighbors were taken aback. What prevented them from realizing she was pregnant? The fact that Sarah adopted a child from an orphanage was not made known to anyone. She didn't want to be ashamed, but rather to make everyone believe she was the one giving birth. She gave a vague response, acknowledging that he was her son. She found pleasure in buying infant clothing and picking out the nursery day center. She had never encountered anything similar. Despite not sleeping for several nights, Sarah didn't feel any pain. She was uncertain about where she found the strength for her son. She was happy taking care of the baby and didn't have to worry about anyone else being there. Dorothea provided Sarah with adequate support and guidance. Emiliano's health did not deteriorate until he was 4 years old. His upbringing brought him to be a smart and submissive youngster. However, one day he was stripped down to his throat. The management of this common disease was marred by a mishap. Afterward, the doctors clarified that the prescribed medications were not effective for him. The child's orphanage records didn't reveal any drug-related allergies or intolerance, but the therapy was ineffective for his immune system. A common sore throat resulted in a life-threatening condition known as plastic anemia. Emiliano had been contending with this illness for 3 years. Sarah devoted herself to saving him. They went to multiple clinics and tried out various treatment options. The disease was occasionally put out by them, but it always recurred. In due course, Emiliano required a bone marrow transplant. The procedure was necessary to save him. His relatives were unknown to Sarah. The orphanage informed her that his parents had died, and there were no other relatives in his name. It was a day that Sarah will always remember. The bathroom floor was the spot where she had been sitting for the entire night and evening. She had never felt so helpless before. She was praying for her son's recovery, relying on God'll provide comfort, but she realized that Emiliano's family wouldn't magically appear, and her strength and abilities were not significant. The conclusion was reached. It was hard to imagine a more negative situation. Sarah was screaming and slamming the cold tiles with her hands and feet. What other roles can it assume? She didn't remain in despair for an extended period. She couldn't bring herself to give up, not at this time and not in this place. She immediately found a way to find someone, even if it meant traveling the entire world. Nonetheless, she was clueless about where to begin. Sarah was determined to keep fighting. She revisited the orphanage from where she brought Emiliano 7 years ago. The director's position remained with Yvonne Prieto, the same woman. Sarah was immediately recognizable to her, and she was happy that she had come to see her. Sarah's revelation of the reason caused Yvonne Prieto to lose her happiness quickly while she was present. The woman stated that Emiliano came to us without any documents. It is uncertain whether he was born in the capital. It's conceivable that he was from somewhere else. What is the explanation for that? Sarah pondered. You didn't come across him on the street. The boy was brought to this location by someone. Did you abduct him from a family member? That's my opinion. According to Yvonne, Emiliano was found on the streets. A bench in the park was where he lay under a blanket. After examining the CCTV footage for several hours, we only saw one girl with a similar bundle in her hands. The quality is so poor that it's impossible to determine if she was carrying Emiliano. The girl's appearance is a mystery to us. Have you made an effort to track down the girl? Inquired Sarah. It's possible that she is not involved with her son, as I previously mentioned. The woman's response conveyed a sense of slight guilt. The camera captured her at the park entrance, and we haven't seen her anywhere else. Can you explain why you are not telling the truth? Sarah didn't give up. Sarah was assured by Yvonne that no one was lying. They were determined to help her, but they couldn't. The child was discovered on the street. He was never sought after by anyone. What actions could they take? This is not the way it occurs. Sarah remained determined. I am looking to sell my apartment and secure a loan. Whatever your desires may be, I'll hand it over to you. Can you provide me with a brief explanation? I apologize for my reluctance. I am unable to assist you. Is Emiliano not a source of worry for us? Yvonne expressed. The only option left for me is to report his illness to the media and enlist the help of charitable organizations to raise funds. Sarah cried and held her head down. According to her, Emiliano could only be donated by a family member. Without that, there was no purpose to fundraising, charity, or anything else. If they didn't find anyone, he had only a few months left to live. Those days would be truly terrible and agonizing. Despite her understanding, Yvonne reiterated that she couldn't be of any assistance. Sarah left without any possessions. Despite being informed beforehand that Emiliano's records had been lost, she held on to hope for miracle. She was taken aback by the director's words, which conveyed that the situation was not going to be well. Sarah went to visit her friend Dorotea in order to share her feelings with someone, cry, and receive verbal support. Might Emiliano be related to that girl? It was suggested by Dorotea that she could be his mother. I'm curious, what exactly is it? Sarah reacted with horror. The age of the girl was 13. Dorotea acknowledged the fact that, in today's world, anything is possible. The fact that she may have been an orphan, possibly due to giving birth while being a silly girl, led her to throw him away. Sarah refuted the claim and stated that it was not true. What effect does it have on the outcome? It won't aid me in rescuing Emiliano. I am clueless about what to do. I'm in a state of financial ruin, and it appears like there's no real benefit to all the hard work. The conclusion awaits me if I fail to locate Emiliano's family. Sarah had already made sacrifices to pay for her son's treatment. Almost all of the savings she had saved since starting to make money were spent by her. Despite the fact that she sold her car in the garage, she didn't feel any remorse as long as her son was healthy. Would it be beneficial to seek the aid of a healer? Dorothea put forward. If modern medicine isn't effective, you can try other approaches. Sarah looked at her friend in a state of madness. She had a fascination with the unexplained, but she wouldn't leave her son in the hands of psychics to ensure his well-being. What is the reason for your gaze pointing downwards? Dorothea appeared to be slightly offended. It's worth mentioning that we had gone to a fortune booth together 3 or 4 years ago. Dorothea was further upset when Sarah left, which is one way only in determining whether or not to get married and another as a cure for an illness. I'm not hopeful, so there's no need to apologize. The possibility of seeking the assistance of a psychic could lead to Dorothea's discovery. I've witnessed on TV that they aid in the search for individuals. It's completely nonsensical. There was no evidence to support the allegation that the girl in that recording was carrying a baby. Everything is muddled. Sarah was fed up with Dorothea's fairy tale proposals as she replied. The woman promptly changed her mind to not engage in a quarrel with her friend. Dorothea's daughter was a topic of interest for Sarah, as she was fond of discussing them. Sarah was so caught up in her friend's comments about her daughter that she almost didn't even listen. She nodded silently and praised the photos of the girl's clay crafts, while also thinking about how to save her son. The following day, Sarah opted to go to the hospital by subway. She had been missing for a number of years. It was a step down the chain for her. Since Sarah had to sell her car, she had been traveling only by taxi or walking. She had to save more than she could afford to disregard her principles. When Sarah stepped onto the subway, she was immediately taken aback by the sheer number of people around her. Everyone was in a hurry, gathering, pushing, and touching each other's feet. She was completely unsure and had no sense of direction. Sarah had not forgotten the way things worked there. She swiftly put herself together and positioned herself at the turn. An elderly woman who appeared more frightened and confused than Sarah had been seen by her just minutes before. Unbeknownst to her, the elderly woman held a banknote and gazed at the turnstile. With a smile on her face, Sarah said, "Let me help you." She paid the fare to the elderly woman by swiping her car at the turnstile. "I am overwhelmed with gratitude, my dear." Sarah thanked the grandma for allowing me to stay where I am. The elderly woman referred to herself as Alice from Keshigan. The name of Sarah was also revealed. They initiated a conversation, leaving nothing to disturb anyone. Sarah was unable to stop looking at this lovely and sweet girl. Her face was tinged with warmth. Sarah's initial impression of her was not accurate as she appeared younger. Her clothes were neatly curated and her eyes were sweet. "Sarah suspected that you were not from the same city. My roots can be traced back to the village." Akasha mentioned that it was their inaugural visit to the capital. "The place is beautiful, but it's crowded and noisy." It was confirmed by Sarah. Akasha stated that she had come to visit her granddaughter, who was in her first year at university. The girl was praised by her, who spoke about how Lou's scholarship helped him gain admission to college. Lou's studies were her primary focus, and she didn't want to go back to the village, so Akasha had to travel with her. According to Akasha, I am the only one in her life. Akasha suddenly stated, "My poor orphan, I can tell you're not very happy. Your face is covered in a message that conveys your feelings of sadness." Sarah's eyes darkened instantly. The conversation with her friend from yesterday may have had an effect, but she felt like Akasha was going to reveal her fortune. Despite their sorrow, the elderly women dazzled me. Sarah's gaze ceased to move in the same direction as before. The woman's body was enveloped in a pleasant warmth as Akasha picked up her hands. "I have a problem, but you may be unable to aid me." Sarah answered by gently releasing her hands from Akasha's. Sarah was apprehensive, but she didn't withdraw from her new friend. Life can be cruel, especially for those who lead a righteous life. All of a sudden, Akasha decided to speak about her memories. "In the past, I had a son named Ignacio. The village's first heartthrob. He was such a good guy. In addition, he journeyed to the city and wedded someone. The girl named Alba was kind. They were content together, but they weren't meant to be happy. Initially, they lost my granddaughter during her delivery. She was a bright and self-sufficient girl from an early age. Antonio was the end result of their happiness. As she listened, Sarah's countenance seemed magical, as though she was actually in a hurry to visit her son. It was intriguing to learn about the fate of Akasha's son, particularly in relation to their children. It's likely that Alba was weary of dealing with Antonio. He was the opposite of Luce, constantly crying and yelling. Due to his tantrums, Ignacio told me that they were unable to sleep. Alba, who was sleepless, seems to have overlooked making broth. She spent the day as a doe with the child. Such a terrible fire. Fortunately, Luz was not present at home during that time. In class, she was present. Ignacio had recently returned from lunch. Following his rescue of Antonio from the apartment, he went back for Alba but never came back. It's been a terrible nightmare. Sarah's words were so emotional that they almost made her cry. Have they passed away? Akasha confirmed that both her son and his wife had suffocation. The children were left without a parent. The responsibility of raising 2 grandchildren falls on you. You have the qualities of a heroine. The old lady was admired by Sarah. Akasha expressed regret by waving her hand, stating that it was not at all. They took away my children and denied me the opportunity to raise my own family. During that fire, Antonio suffered only minor injuries. The sweater on his skin burned while he was wearing a synthetic suit. It was a terrible burn. My mother was a healer, but she didn't practice witchcraft. She formulated herbal infusions and tinctures. My homemade ointment was used as a burn treatment, and I made the offer myself, but it was confiscated. The locals informed social workers that I was a local witch, and they proceeded to visit the village. What was the reason behind their assertion if it's not true? Sarah was taken aback. What are your expectations from them? The village was something that Akasha smiled about. What else needs to be done by the neighbors? They rumored to tell different stories about each other. Despite my mother's lack of experience, they still view me as a witch. They took the children away after diagnosing my mental illness. It wasn't until I turned 18 that I learned about their destiny. At that time, it was a challenging situation for me. Did your granddaughter have a self-directed conversation with you? Sarah elucidated. She succeeded. Akasha stated that she had been eagerly anticipating my arrival, but I never did. It was a struggle for her as well. They aimed to separate her from Antonio, but she managed to escape with him. At that time, he was only a newborn. Luz expressed a desire to come near me, but they apprehended her on her way to the train station. She never reunited with her brother. We have no knowledge of his existence. The grandmother shed tears of intense emotion. It was obvious that the memories were difficult for her. Sarah embraced Akasha and showed her support. It is my belief that you will come across your Antonio. There's no need to worry. It's possible that you will approach him alone. The grandmother was comforted by Sarah. Despite Lose's knowledge of where to go, Antonio was still an infant. It is doubtful that he will come across us. The support you have shown is greatly appreciated. Akasha conveyed her thanks to her new friend. Sarah explained how to get to the right station for the grandmother, and their granddaughter was supposed to meet her. Once again, the woman was left to fend for herself. The account of Akasha drew her away from her harsh reality to some extent. She shook her head in frustration, forgetting about her own problems. Once again, Sarah was contemplating the best course of action to rescue Emiliano. The discovery of a witch in the subway was unexpected, as she had been talking to her friend about locating a healer just yesterday. Despite the grandmother's assertion that she didn't do anything like that, Sarah felt capable of helping her. The hospital was a challenge for Sarah to enter, and she struggled to make it to the top floor. The door of the ward where her child was dying was completely inaccessible. Emiliano's strength was waning with each passing day. He gave the impression of being terrible. A multitude of devices were connected to his slender, petite figure. Still, it was all a bust. Sarah found her son sleeping when she entered his room. The woman opted to open the window, as it was quite stuffy in the room. It seems that Emiliano was in hot weather as he pulled up his shirt almost to the top. Sarah noticed a scar beneath his ribcage all of a sudden. She was always aware of its existence, but she rarely considered it. The injury that Emiliano sustained during his early years was acquired by Sarah when he was taken out of the orphanage. There was a hole in that spot. The cause of the baby's injury was not known to social workers. Sarah has now figured out the source of her son's scar. She was taken aback by it. The information she possessed was comparable to a case of story, according to Sarah. The woman's heart pounding began, and her hand shaking. Emiliano's grandmother is a senior woman. Sarah screamed. The woman promptly left the room. Sarah was running, causing damage to all those who were in her path. The station where Akasha was going to and the university her granddaughter was studying were both remembered by her. Sarah was hoping to find them both. Her grandson's sister left the orphanage undetected. On her way to the right station, Sarah questioned herself. Emiliano was in a relationship with the girl. The fire caused harm to Akasha's granddaughter. The origin of Emiliano's scar is a mystery. Everything is in keeping with the age. I'm certain that I came across two relatives of Emiliano, Antonio in particular. The correct station was reached by Sarah. Clearly, Akasha was no more. The woman enrolled in university. The girl who was left without a parent wanted to make sure she lived in the dorm and couldn't rent an apartment. The aspiration of Sarah was to find a silver lining in that place. The receptionist in the university dormitory was unexpectedly friendly and helpful. Inadvertently, Sarah recollected her dorm-specific bunk room. She was in agony as she held all the students in her hands. "Is it possible to lose something? Can you recall what occurred in the first year?" she asked again. "What is your surname? I wonder if you could tell me the quantity of girls with names like Luz that exist. I am unaware of the surname." Sarah spoke in a manner that was selfless. "I acknowledge that she's an orphan. The search isn't made easier by that." The woman remained unimpressed and shrugged. Another lady came up to her at that point. She had a similar appearance to someone you wouldn't want to ask personal questions. Sarah was met with a grimace in her eyes as she looked on. "What is the reason for the presence of unknown individuals in the dormitory? What was the room you were about to enter?" the imposing woman inquired. Sarah, a freshman, stated her intention to find someone who shares her struggles and assert herself by saying that she had to communicate with such individuals. An orphan, she is currently pursuing her dream of becoming a speech therapist. "How can I let you in if you're not aware of who you have become?" The dorm room and Dad reacted with even more forceful questions, furrowing her brows. "Laura, that's all right. Is there a hidden gem in this place?" Her colleague was attempting to ease her feelings. Sarah had reached her limit. Her intention was not to impress a stranger's self. She came to seek aid. Had she not been in this desperate state, she would have left immediately unprepared for the rude treatment she received. Nevertheless, she summoned all her might and took charge. "I inquired about the presence of a girl in this area, and Sarah's voice stuck with her teeth. She's a lad that has been abandoned. It's conceivable that I found her close relative. Are you afflicted with anyone?" The two women looked each other in. The person who was a little less embarrassed than her friend received shame, while Laura became more emotional. She was the dominant force in this place, and nobody had any objections. Before unleashing her full anger on Sarah, the dormitant had already paused to catch her breath, but was suddenly stopped by an audible voice. "What are you up to, Sarah? I'm glad to have the chance to meet you again." Akisha uttered the words as she entered the hall. She had just returned from seeing her granddaughter, who appeared in front of her. Sarah was quick to point out that this was not a heavy load. She bore a striking resemblance to Emiliano. Her blue eyes and light curly hair were alike. "The unknown individual I informed you about is now a stranger." Without her presence, Akisha introduced Luz to her grandmother. Sarah's tears were not understood by the grandmother or the other party. She was not offended by what they had done. She was just staring at them, and there wasn't even a hint of what had happened. Tears streamed down her face. Laura and the receptionist were taken aback by this particular event. Sarah was about to be thrown out onto the street by the dormitant, who had completely forgotten just a moment ago. The anticipation was present for what the next step would bring. Sarah refused to let them do it. She invited her new friends to come and talk there. "Can you recall the events that led to the separation of your brother and you?" The girl was asked by Sarah. Prior to making the request, she wanted to confirm that she was her son's sister. "Of course, I have memories of losing him." Luz stated that she has never felt responsible for what occurred in a single day. It was apparent to her that she truly felt remorse. Those were the days when I remember feeling extremely fatigued. For hours, I had been begging people to come and buy me a ticket to the station. It's likely that this is how they discovered me. I had enough money, so I left Antonio on the bench and went to buy a ticket. Despite my shame, I was unable to stand up straight at the time. Luz burst into tears as they caught me. It was clear that she couldn't reconcile her actions of leaving the young boy alone on the bench. You are too young to contemplate the aftermath, so don't be anxious. She was comforted by Sarah. What could have been the outcome for him? What would have happened if he were to have been attacked by dogs, frozen or starved? Use tears to erase the words. Why do you want me to ask this question? Your brother is alive, but life is not going well for him. Sarah's words brought tears to her eyes. Akeisha gave a gash and covered her mouth. Luz observed the woman with hopeful eyes. Is he still among the living? Do you have any idea where he is? She inquired. Sarah responded with a smile, saying yes, as she is his mother. It goes without saying that his foster mother was there. Luz and the grandmother both widened their eyes. They were astonished by what they heard. All of a sudden, the girl remembered that Sarah had mentioned the boy's health problems. You didn't search for us without any justification, did you? She inquired. Sarah mentioned that she has a regrettable reason for being. We'll be at the hospital to confirm that Emiliano is your biological child if you're prepared. They both gave a nod. They ceased questioning until the end. It was their wish to locate their blood relative. Sarah recounted her experience of adopting Emiliano and learning about his origins in the orphanage while on the journey. Luz acknowledged that the stories were alike. Sarah subsequently included a scar that was visible above the rib cage. The location of the burn is unknown to me. It was evident to me that it was on his body, as Akeisha mentioned. It was on his ribs, as Granny would have you know. Luz stated that she has no recollection of that. I'm positive that we're heading to our Antonio location right now. I'm sorry they didn't inform me about the boy's name. I gave him the name Emiliano. Sarah's reply was modest. It's not significant. Luz stated that he is my brother, in essence. The ladies entered the ward. Luz rushed to the boy's aid. She sat down on her knees and took a close look at his face. He is the one. Granny, I can assure you that he is the one. Slowly let go of what you're saying. Her voice was filled with excitement, tenderness, and joy. Akeisha looked up at the sleeping boy as he approached the bed. Especially when you were little, he's very much like you, said the grandmother as she wiped away her tears. Sarah was modestly positioned in the corner of the ward, keeping her distance from the sisters and the grandmother's respect for her son, whom they had lost 7 years ago. It's unfortunate that Emiliano couldn't awaken and converse with them at this time, despite being completely unaware of the identities of these individuals. Would you be open to donating your blood for Emiliano Los Angeles? Sarah inquired if it was possible to save him with the help of a family member. What is the purpose of your inquiry? Luz declared that she would do everything in her power to rescue him. Take all of Emiliano, but leave the rest behind. Sarah brought the girl to her grandmother's ward in Emiliano for a short time to spend with him, and she then went to see the doctor. She revealed to Saturnino that she discovered her son's family members and they were willing to donate their blood for him. It's excellent. The doctor expressed his delight in receiving the very positive news. Let them come to this place right away. I'll outline the process. Compatibility testing will be included in our plans. The operation can be done this week if all goes well. Sarah was completely overwhelmed with happiness. She immediately went to the ward to receive news from the doctor. The wet floor sign went unnoticed by her due to her rush. Sarah was thrown into the air and crashed onto the tiled floor. A loud crunch was heard throughout the department, followed by a loud cry. The commotion attracted the entire hospital. The woman on the floor, with her arms and legs splaying in different directions, was the center of attention. A complex fracture in her leg, which resulted in displacement, had Sarah trapped. It's a stroke of good fortune that you fell while hospitalized. The traumatologist's joke suggests that they have not yet reached their destination. Sarah expressed her indignation by saying, I don't share your joy. A complex operation is on my son's schedule, and I will be confined to a cast and incapable of supporting him. Sarah was taken to the hospital. During the most crucial weeks of her life, she was completely incapacitated for several weeks. Her leg was broken that evening, and she received a visit from the case it came. The grandmother comforted Sarah by saying, "Don't worry. The doctor was spoken to by us. Lose the tests. Tomorrow is when we'll be informed about the transplant. Don't worry, it's true. Emiliano and you will be looked after by Granny. I'll be there to lend a hand whenever needed." According to Satinino, they released me on the same day after the tests and provided Sarah with support. Sarah expressed her gratitude for the opportunity to have you. Dorothea was not alone in leaving her friend behind. On the first day, she made an appearance to see her. Sarah was quick to express her happiness by sharing the incredible story of how she came across a case and about Emiliano's sister who would be the donor. "Are you not concerned about the possibility of taking Emiliano away once he recuperates?" Inquire from Dorothea. Sarah laughed at her friend, stating that you are aware of how to escalate the situation. "Is there a method to remove him? He is my 7-year-old son. He cannot be taken away from me by any unexpected relatives." Sarah was completely unconcerned about the likelihood of being separated by Emiliano and the lovely old lady. The law does not permit hate to do it, even if they wanted. Yet another question irks her. What is the best way to clarify to the boy that these grandmothers and this girl were twins? What motivated them to lend a hand? Sarah was aware that it was wrong, but she would have loved for them to not see each other again after the surgery. Sarah spent a month in the hospital. Akasha, Luz, and Dorothea came to see her during this time. Nevertheless, her thoughts were solely focused on Emiliano's development. Luz donated to Emiliano. This news brought Sarah great joy. The worst was finally over. The boy underwent a challenging rehabilitation process that lasted for several months. Still, it was preferable to wait for death. A different female was present in Sarah's room. She had a broken leg as well. Every day she was visited by Salvador, a man. Sarah was immediately drawn to him. He was both attractive and well-mannered. He consistently requested access to the room, greeted the patients, and inquired about their well-being. Eventually, Sarah discovered that Salvador had been staring at her for an extended period. He once brought her a bunch of flowers. "Mora, you have a wonderful husband. It's safe to say that he gave me flowers, and it didn't bother you," Sarah asked her neighbor. Mora chuckled and shook her head. Sarah was slightly surprised by this response. It caused her to feel slightly offended. Did she fail to evoke jealousy in anyone and appear extremely foolish? The neighbor promptly clarified everything. Sarah's darkness was evident to her after she laughed. "My brother, Salvador," Mora replied with a burst of laughter. Sarah also smiled. Her reaction to this news was one of genuine happiness. "It's expected that you didn't guess, as Mora mentioned our differences. I won't permit my partner to openly admire another woman in that manner." Sarah felt humiliated. She conveyed that nobody commended her, saying coyly, "I am certain that my brother will." Her neighbor stated that he is unquestionably attracted to you. "Just so you know, I told him about your story. Let me know if you're willing to forgive me for that." Nonetheless, he considered it as his own tragic fate. He was so frightened that he inquired about the state of your boy's health. Sarah mentioned that I should provide my phone number to enable him to ask me directly in the future. Salvador visited the room that had been dear to him since Mora's discharge. Despite this, he only visited Sarah and they got to know each other better. It was revealed that the man had been single for a considerable time and had abandoned any hope of forming. He was driven insane by Sarah's actions. Her son's story had a profound impact on Salvador. He couldn't have been more impressed when she disclosed that Emiliano was her adopted son. "How did you come up with the idea of doing this?" he inquired. "What are the steps to raising a child without any companionship?" Sarah stated that her desire to become a mother was greater than any fear. Her decision didn't make her regret it, even though her son's illness had taken a turn for the worse. Salvador acknowledged that he had expressed his desire to adopt a child from an orphanage. He was unable to have children, but he didn't take such a bold action. The hospital discharged Sarah before her son. Without delay, she made the journey to see Emiliano. She was so emotional she couldn't stop shedding tears when she laid eyes on him. Her son was in a better state, smiling and reaching for her. Sarah's hug towards her son resulted in fractures in his spine. "It's painful, Mom." Emiliano chuckled. "It was such a long time coming. I miss you so much." His mother answered, letting go of her hold. Sarah inquired of her son's health for many years, and he was interested in using her crutches. She was still unable to move around without assistance. After sharing the latest news, Emiliano asked her the first question. He had been experiencing it for days. "I'm curious, my mom. Who is the girl that lent me her kidneys? Can you provide some information?" Emiliano inquired. Without delay, Sarah took things into her own hands. She had not disclosed to her son that he was adopted. It was clear to Emiliano that he had no knowledge of his sister who came to his rescue. His mother was unsure of how to inform him. She had no intention of disclosing the truth to her son for life, but she didn't want to disclose it all too soon. She assumed he wasn't ready yet. Sarah replied that she's your sister, but wouldn't go into more detail. The boy declared that he had no knowledge of having a little sister. "That's really good. Is there a chance for me to meet her?" The response from his mother was that once your health becomes fully normal, she will be able to meet her. It was evident that brother and sister had to come together. Sarah postponed the meeting while Luz and Akisha were eager to talk to Emiliano. She was at a loss as to how to break the news to the boy. He believed that he had only one mother for 7 years. What was the explanation she gave for him having 2 new relatives? Sarah opted to seek counsel from Akisha and Luz. This conversation was something they had been waiting for. "According to Luz, we can inform him that we inhabited a different city. Do you share the belief that his real parents perished in the fire and should not be informed about it?" Sarah elucidated. "It's too early, in my opinion." Luz observed that Emiliano, who was just 7 years old, looked at her grandmother. It was apparent to Akisha that she didn't share her granddaughter's viewpoint. She had a sorrowful look on her face and lips that were shaking as if she was about to speak but couldn't. Sarah requested that Akisha speak out. "I wish to have a conversation with both of you in isolation and determine the appropriate course of action. My opinion is that the child should be informed of the truth, and I want my grandson to remember his father's legacy. According to the grandmother, he was a man of great worth. He's only 7 years old, my grannies. After a brief illness that required his immediate death, do you think you would be willing to shoulder the burden?" contended that Luz. "My wish is for us to reach a consensus on our issues." Sarah accompanied with a small touch. It was unexpected that Luz and Sarah were so insistent on Akisha's insistence that Emiliano should have been informed of his family responsibilities as soon as possible. A true scandal erupted between the women, with one of them being a grandmother and the other being her granddaughter. Sarah only occasionally mentioned her desire to resolve the matter in a peaceful manner. Luz contended that sharing the news would obliterate the child's mind, but Akisha declined to listen to her. The discussion lasted for several hours, and the grandmother eventually gave in to her granddaughter's arguments. She was persuaded by Luz. "As a result, we'll disclose it to him at least when he's grown up. Currently, can you mention that you have lived in a different urban area?" Sarah summed it up. "Yes," Luz affirmed. Akisha nodded in agreement, seemingly taken aback. On a deeper level, she was not in favor of this choice. "Given that your man is a real father and lives in Switzerland, perhaps it would be beneficial to introduce him to you?" Akisha asked in a sarcastic manner, prompting Luz to look at him with disapproval. Sarah responded with a calm and composed no response. "I have no plans to be untruthful with my son. Besides, I'm ready to disclose the complete truth about you two at this moment. It is my opinion that Emiliano's health and well-being should be our top priority. The idea of causing him psychological harm is not on my mind." Akisha expressed remorse for her snideness and revealed that she had feelings for Emiliano as well. The girl wished to associate with the boy as a grandmother, but at the same time, he would believe she was only referring to his mother. This was the most difficult part for her to come to terms with. Sarah desired to have a private conversation with Luz after such an intense discussion. She couldn't fathom why Luz was so disrespectful to her grandmother, who was the one she cherished. Luz's personality was formed by living in an orphanage, and he didn't make eye contact with Sarah. "I was informed that children in that place may be unkind." "Was it truly as disastrous as people say?" Sarah inquired. Luz recollected, sighing deeply as if only the children had been present. Caregivers and educators. The feeling was that you were hated by everyone in the room. "As if I were an orphan. It wasn't my choice. My utmost gratitude goes out to you for saving my brother's life and making it impossible for me to oppose you. My grandmother is unaware of how difficult it was for me to be there. If the resort had been health resort Would I have run away? I attempted to flee 3 more times after that, but she's unaware, and each time they caught me up. If Emiliano were my age, I can't imagine how he would behave. The following day, Sarah made the decision to introduce her son to his sister and grandmother. After Luz completed her studies, they decided to meet in the evening. Nevertheless, Sarah visited Emiliano during the day to convey the good news. When someone else made the decision for her, she was still pondering how to introduce Keisha to her son. Sarah was surprised to find Keisha in Emiliano's room, directing the boy to a photo album. Sarah was astonished to realize what was happening. She opted not to create a scene out of respect for Emiliano and Keisha's age. "Can you tell me about your mother?" With tears in his eyes and a chin that trembled, Emiliano asked the question. For an additional second, Emiliano would break down in tears. These indications were immediately apparent to Sarah. She smiled and made her way towards him, hoping that everything was all right. "Mom, is that accurate? What was the message conveyed by that senior lady to me? Is it factual?" he inquired. Sarah gave a silent nod. She was unsure of what to do. She was anxious about her son's potential questions and worried about his response. Sarah's voice was too low with emotion as she said she was only coming to report the incident. She glanced at Keisha. Despite not being angry with the woman, she felt so hurt that she secretly went through everything in her life. Was it not possible for them to come together and reveal the truth to Emiliano? Sarah was not opposed to it. "Emiliano, Sarah couldn't keep herself together, but I love you forever and will continue to do so." Gradually, she moved her son to cradle him. The fear that Emiliano would refuse her now. If his love for her ceased, what would be the outcome? Despite everything, the boy held onto his mother's chest and hugged her tightly. "I'm so happy, Mom. A sister and a grandmother are now part of my family. Can you tell me, by the way, when I'll have the chance to meet her?" the boy inquired. His voice was filled with joy, and surprisingly for Sarah, he took his parents' information seriously. She exuded a sense of relief. Sarah mentioned that Luz would come to see you tonight after her classes. With her head bowed, Keisha was sitting quietly. Sarah's gaze brought her back to life, and she even reacted with a blush. Without Emiliano's presence, they left her to converse. "I'm sorry, but I couldn't keep it a secret. I'm not going to turn a blind eye to you. I can't help but swear that Keisha was right behind her. My sole intention is to ensure that he has knowledge of his parents' background. I'm running late. I want to make sure our grandson is informed about his family background." Despite the intense emotions inside, Sarah stated that it was all good and fine. In essence, he took it with full dedication. "I pray that it doesn't cause any harm to him in the future." Luz was initially infuriated when she found out that Emiliano was already aware of everything. Compared to Sarah, she expressed more bitterness towards her grandmother. Keisha's neck disappears into her shoulders, causing her to shrink. Sarah opted to defend her. "There's no need to worry." Emiliano took it with a relaxed attitude. "He's eagerly anticipating the chance to meet you. He is unaware of and will never be aware of the bench incident. And you can trust me when I say that." Sarah was comforted by Lose's arrival. The girl went to her brother alone. He was beaming with joy. She replied positively. Lose gave a silent hug to Emiliano, and they remained in that state for several minutes. Afterward, both siblings were sharing their own stories. During the conversation, the boy mentioned his passion for soccer and pledged to demonstrate his abilities to his sister once he is fully fit. "He's the most exceptional child I've ever encountered." When she exited her brother's room, Luz stated, "I appreciate you taking care of him." Luz and Sarah were hugging as Keisha stood guard, her head shaking from side to side. She continued to experience feelings of guilt, especially because she was uncertain about her granddaughter's response. Sarah wasn't as clear-eyed when it came to Keisha. The grandmother was hugged by Lose, who smiled and said, "Come here." "According to Sarah, you are a true healer. Emiliano might have been killed if I hadn't come across you in the subway. It took 180 days for the boy to be released from confinement. The doctors cautioned that the illness could worsen and recur, but Sarah was certain it wouldn't happen. Having conquered death, she was now free from fear." Sarah and her son settled in the large house of Salvador after he was brought back home. A new level of intimacy emerged within the couple. Salvador and Emiliano's friendship blossomed within a short time. They played together in the evenings, and he even built a small soccer field in his backyard. The idea of having a real family left Sarah feeling disbelief. She had given up on finding a suitable father for her son, but Salvador proved to be an excellent match. Dorotea, her friend, suggested that you may have had to face all these obstacles in order to find happiness in life. In response, Sarah stated that she thinks it's a commendable recognition for the suffering. Emiliano was unable to attend the start of the school year, but his sister assisted him in making up for it. Despite starting school at 8, he still managed to make many friends. The boy also participated in the school's soccer team. His sister and he had outings every weekend. Loz's studies occasionally led him to assist him. They were inseparable. After years of separation, Loz seemed to want to make sure she and her brother could communicate with each other. Emiliano's grandmother was visited by him during his vacations. Checkups were taken by Sarah with her son multiple times annually. The thought of the illness resurfacing deeply troubled her. Emiliano was surrounded by his loved ones and kept himself in good health. No one questioned or remembered that they were not blood relatives. Their relationships were truly akin to those of family members. The fact that everyone came together was even more lovely. Loz's visits to her brother were welcomed by Sarah, who also took Emiliano for a cuppa with his grandmother in the village, and watched with happiness as their husband and son joined in. Subscribe to our channel and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one.